Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing, and today we've got another slug that we've never tried on the channel before, and a few of you guys have said you wanted to see us try some of these, so when I finally found some, I had to pick them up so we could bring them out here and see what they could potentially do through my setup. So as for those slugs we've got today, I got out some of these, the Hornady Custom Lite Reduced Recoil Slugs. These are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 300 grain FTX slug, moving about 1,575 feet per second, and they are a Sabo round too. But we've got a rifled barrel out here today, so we'll see what they can do, and we'll see if they actually reduce recoil any noticeable amount. Generally, Hornady is pretty good about their lower recoil claims, and we really didn't lose a ton of velocity, still at 1575. So if these are much nicer on the shoulder to shoot and they're pretty accurate, then they could be a pretty decent option for a 75 to 100 yard deer gun, or if you're hunting thicker woods or something, closer range slug territory, these could be a pretty decent option. And real quick, here's what one of those slugs looks like. You can see that FTX slug down in there. Looks very much like your standard Hornady SST loads. There's really not much of a difference here, but supposedly they're loaded a little lighter for recoil, so we'll see what happens. And as for the setup we're going to run them through, I brought out my Remington 870 special purpose. It's got an 18.5 inch fully rifled cantilever barrel on it with a loopholed VX1 2-7x28 on top. Very nice little handy slug gun, but it does have a quite a bit shorter barrel, so we'll see what we can get for velocity and accuracy performance through this setup, since this is my slug gun rig here. It's been a little picky with some Hornady SST stuff in the past, so will it like the custom lights a little better? I don't know, but we'll see what we can get. But as for today's test, we're going to run it the same as we typically do. So we'll shoot a 3-shot group at 50 yards and then move it out and shoot another 3-shot group at 100 yards. It's not necessarily a perfect test, but I don't have a ton of boxes of these, so it will at least tell us if this combination is even remotely decent at all. And of course, I have the chronograph as well, so we can get our velocity from the shells. So let's get you guys a view of that 50-yard target and start shooting our 50 and 100-yard groups and see what we can get from these Hornady Custom Lite Sabo slugs through the 870 with that rifled barrel today. Alright, so let's take a peek at our chronograph here real quick before we look at our target. The boss claim is 1575, but we do have a much shorter barrel, most likely, than what the factory tested at 18.5 inches. They probably ran it through somewhere between a 20 and a 24 inch, if I had to guess. So we did not see the 1575 claim, but that does not surprise me at all. Typically, we're 100 to 150 feet per second under box claims with this barrel, and that's pretty accurate here. So let's go through our numbers and see what it actually gave us. So for a high, we had 1455. For a low, we had 1396. That gave us an average of 1427. So that's roughly 150 feet per second under the claim, which is about what I expected to see. And of course, here's your energy numbers for a 300 grain FTX slug at 1427. So you can see what kind of energy we're actually pushing. But that gave us an extreme spread of 59 and a standard deviation of 22. So for a reduced recoil shell that was claiming 1575 out of our short barrel, that kind of velocity isn't bad. And for a deer hunt, that is still plenty good enough to get the job done.
And I will jump in here in editing real quick and say that these slugs were very nice to shoot. They were very soft in the recoil department. I could shoot a ton of them all day long and would never be bothered by the recoil, so I was rather impressed with the recoil reduction that they had.
But what kind of accuracy did we see out of them? Let's go over and measure some things on our target and see how they look. Alright, so now let's take a look at our targets here and see what we got for accuracy. And right off the bat, before we even measure it, I can tell you these definitely have performed way better than what the SST Hornadys did with that exact same setup. So that's already a plus. Maybe my little bit shorter barrel prefers a little bit lower velocity, at least with these Hornady shells. But overall, they seem to have been pretty middle of the road. They're definitely not the best we've seen, but they're far from the worst as well. So we'll start measuring our groups over there on the left with our 50-yard yard 3-shot group. It's pretty much straight up and down string, so definitely not the greatest for 50 yards, but I felt good about all of my trigger pulls today, so I'm confident that that is just a pretty realistic group from my setup. So I'll measure it and give you guys the numbers on what we got. So at 50 yards, we had 2.13 inches, so still plenty usable enough. It's smaller than your fist at 50 yards, which is more than good enough to take a deer with or whatever the case would be, but definitely far from our best 50-yard group as well. Generally at 50, I would prefer to see them all pretty much touching, but that is still serviceable. Now let's move over to our 100-yard group on the right, and our first shot is this bullet hole just off the edge of the paper right over here that I'm circling, and our other two are these two right here on the target. And once again, I debated on taking another shot here just in case this one over here on the right was me, but ultimately I felt really good about these trigger pulls, and based on what we saw at 50, this kind of makes sense at 100. And if we would have taken another shot, there's a good chance that it might have been a little low or a little high or left or right or whatever, and opened this group up or at least maintained it. So I feel pretty confident that that is pretty average size group right there for our 100-yard performance. But let's measure it and at least see what we got. So at 100 yards, we had 3.33 inches for a group. So we did open it up a little bit, just a little bit over 3 inches at 100. That's more than good enough to take a deer with. Typically with a slug gun, I like to see sub 3 inches. So we're pretty much right there at it. So ultimately, definitely not a terrible performance. That's more than good enough to take out on a hunt if you are a little more recoil sensitive and are hunting in an area where it might be shotgun only or slug only or something like that. That's going to absolutely get it done. And another curious thing I'm noticing is I aimed at that central red dot for both the 50 and 100 yards, and we really don't have a ton of bullet drop to contend with either. So if you zero it in at 100, you're going to be pretty much the same point of impact, it would seem, most of the way through your bullet trajectory. So overall, I'd say that these performed pretty decent. I still think my particular 870 prefers the Remington AccuTips, but this does appear to be a solid option if you're a little more recoil sensitive. And here are a couple of the Sabos out of those slugs. They very much look like your standard Hornady stuff here. The black, pretty stiff plastic Sabos. We had good rifle engagement on the ends there, so looking good here. And they all pretty much went about 30 yards down range or so, and they all opened up pretty evenly. So I think they did their job plenty good enough for these slugs today. Definitely nothing out of the ordinary or nothing that I think we should really take note of here. Alright, y'all, well, what did you think about that performance right there? I'd say they're pretty decent. They're a solid option. Roughly 3-inch group at 100 yards is plenty good enough to get the job done on a deer. And these definitely are a reduced recoil slug. They were very pleasant to shoot. Definitely significantly less recoil than your average slug shell, without a doubt. And with that kind of accuracy, that would be a pretty decent option for your close to mid-range hunts with a recoil-sensitive person that might have to hunt in a shotgun-only area. Seems like it would be a pretty solid option. So as always, leave your thoughts in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of those Hornady custom light reduced recoil slugs? And if so, what kind of results have you seen from them? And is that kind of accuracy or velocity good enough for you to want to take out on a hunt? And if so, what kind of ranges would you be looking at? Would you limit yourself a little bit, or are you going to be good out to 100 yards with that? Let me know all that down in the comments. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.